Jonathan Melvoin was born into a family of music. His father was a studio legend. His sister played alongside Prince. Jonathan grew up surrounded by greatness, yet always felt himself standing in the background. Then, in 1995, his chance arrived. He joined the Smashing Pumpkins at the very moment the band was at the height of worldwide fame. It was a stepping stone to escape the shadow, a chance to be remembered by his own name. But only 1 year later, what came to him was not glory, but a mysterious death in a New York hotel. He was found unconscious in the early morning hours. The person with him discovered it, but did not call for help immediately. More than 30 minutes passed before 911 was dialed. By the time the ambulance arrived, Jonathan had no chance left. He was 34 years old, a young father, a musician who had longed to be recognized. And in the end, he left quietly. His funeral held without his bandmates present. What truly happened in those 30 delayed minutes? Chapter 1. Born into music, privilege or chain. Jonathan Melvoin was born into a household where music was the very air they breathed. His father, Mike Melvoin, was not only a pianist, he was part of the legendary Wrecking Crew, the group of musicians who played behind the recordings of Frank Sinatra, Tom Waits, John Lennon. In that house, the piano sounded every morning, and the drums, the guitars, never seemed to fall silent. Jonathan was only 5 years old when his small hands first touched the drum. For his father, it was not a game. It was a right of inheritance. A Melvoin child was not simply to study music, but to live inside it. The challenge was that Jonathan was not the only one carrying that weight. His twin sisters, Wendy and Susanna, quickly proved themselves prodigies. In time, they would stand beside Prince in the Revolution, their names recognized around the world. Jonathan, meanwhile, kept searching for his place. A childhood friend once recalled, "Jonathan was cheerful, always laughing, but sometimes I caught his eyes. Far away, lost, as if he never felt good enough." Can you imagine? To be born in the glow of greatness, yet always feel overshadowed. As he grew, Jonathan tried his hand with small bands, from punk to alternative. He played with the Dickies and other lesser-known groups, loud, raw, restless. There, he found a kind of freedom. No longer the son of Mike Melvoin, no longer the brother of Wendy and Lisa. But to the world at large, Jonathan remained a name behind others. Some said Jonathan never ran toward the spotlight. If anything, he avoided it. After shows, instead of staying to shake hands or bask in admiration, he would slip away alone. That was his habit, a colleague remembered. He never stayed to enjoy the glory. In a rare letter to a friend, Jonathan once wrote, "The music in my house was so loud, it drowned out my own voice." Reading those words, one could sense the fracture inside him, the feeling of being only a shadow. Perhaps that was why Jonathan chose the long way around, not racing onto the big stage, but moving through small studios and crowded clubs. Not because he lacked talent, but because he never believed the light was truly his. And from those early days, a quiet question began to follow him. Was it the very burden of being born into greatness that planted the seed of loneliness, one that would remain with him until the very end? Chapter 2. Entering Prince's universe, yet still a shadow. After years of playing in small punk bands around Los Angeles, Jonathan finally found an opportunity most young musicians could only dream of, working with Prince. He became part of the Family, one of Prince's side projects, the group that recorded the original version of Nothing Compares to You. For Jonathan, it was a ticket straight into the heart of 1980s pop music. But the opportunity came with limits. In Prince's world, everything revolved around one man. Jonathan was there, his playing steady and professional, yet rarely seen or mentioned. His twin sisters, Wendy and Susanna, were the ones in the spotlight, standing prominently with Prince in the Revolution. One musician from that era later recalled, "Jonathan was good, but Prince never really let him in. There was always a distance. He wasn't trusted the way Wendy was." And so, Jonathan repeated the same pattern, present, but in the background. He was in the rehearsals. He played on stage. He appeared in the studio. but rarely left a mark of his own. In one of his few candid remarks, he once said quietly, "I was there." But who remembers? You can feel the bitterness in that line. To stand at the center of a musical legend, yet remain invisible. The difference between him and his sisters only grew sharper. Wendy and Lisa became icons, inseparable from Prince's story for years. Jonathan, meanwhile, looked on as his family shone. A friend once noted, he loved music, but he always seemed out of place. Wrong spot, wrong time. Those years with Prince did teach him valuable lessons: discipline, relentless rehearsal, and the craft of making world-class music. But they never gave him what he longed for most: an identity of his own. He was simply another name on a long roster of musicians. Not the face the audience remembered, not a star. In silence, that hunger grew, to be recognized by his own name, not only as Wendy and Lisa's brother, or Mike Melvoin's son. Someone close to him remembered, Jonathan often said he wanted a place of his own. Nothing huge, just that people would know it was him, not because of someone else. Eventually, Jonathan stepped away from Prince's orbit, moving through a string of smaller projects. They didn't bring him fame, but they kept his hope alive, that one day, the right chance would come. In 1995, the Smashing Pumpkins, one of the most celebrated alt-rock bands in the world, were preparing for the biggest tour of their career and needed a keyboardist. When the invitation came, Jonathan knew this was the moment he had been waiting for. A band at the peak of its power, a world tour that would place him before tens of thousands of fans each night, and a position strong enough to put the name Jonathan Melvoin into memory. But the brighter the light, the deeper the shadows behind it. Jonathan was ready to step forward. What he could not know was that the same journey would lead him toward his final days. Was it his hunger to finally be seen that pushed him into such dangerous territory? Into a world where light and darkness blurred, and no one could truly see the line between. Chapter 3. The Great Tour and a Friendship that Led to Heroin. By 1995, the Smashing Pumpkins were at their peak. Their album Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness had just been released, a global phenomenon. They filled stadiums, dominated the charts, and graced magazine covers. At the height of success, everything was fragile. Jonathan joined the tour as keyboardist. After years of standing behind others, he now stood at the center of one of the biggest bands in the world. Madison Square Garden, the Tokyo Dome. Nights when tens of thousands screamed. For Jonathan, it was the chance he had always dreamed of. But inside, the band was fracturing. Billy Corgan was exhausted from carrying the creative load. James Iha and Darcy were drifting apart. And drummer Jimmy Chamberlin was still struggling with heroin. Jonathan entered just as things were unraveling. He bonded quickly with Chamberlin, not only on stage, but off. Members of the crew recalled, whenever Jimmy disappeared, Jonathan was often by his side. Wendy, Jonathan's sister, later told Rolling Stone that her brother had not been an addict before the tour. But within months, things had changed. The quiet question lingered. Was it friendship that pulled him in, or had he been waiting for an excuse to let go? January of 1996, the Asian tour. In Bangkok, Chamberlin was discovered too high to finish a performance. Jonathan was sternly warned. An internal memo from the tour emphasized zero tolerance for repeat offenses. Everyone knew who the warning was meant for. May of 1996, Lisbon. Jonathan and Chamberlin were found unconscious near the hotel, revived just in time. The band kept it quiet, giving them another chance. Some accounts claim they were revived by drastic means, though the public record does not confirm it. To drive the point home, the tour contract was amended with a strict disciplinary clause, reminding every member they carried responsibility for the life of the group. Jonathan still tried to present another side. He told friends, "I have a wife, I have children, I can't lose it all." But reality told a different story. A member of the crew remembered he knew the cost, but there were nights when he gave in, as if nothing else mattered. The tour schedule was relentless. Sleep was scarce. Management kept control tight. In that environment, Heroin became the fastest escape, and its cost, though delayed, was inevitable. Did Jonathan follow Jimmy out of loyalty? Or was he also searching for something, a crutch to fill the emptiness he had carried since childhood? Chapter 4. 30 Minutes Between Life and Death. July 11th, 1996. The Smashing Pumpkins were preparing for a historic night at Madison Square Garden. All of New York City was looking toward them. But Jonathan Melvoin and Jimmy Chamberlin chose to stay apart at the Regency Hotel on Park Avenue. That night, they brought back a batch of heroin known as red rum, the word murder spelled backwards. New York police had already warned that this batch was unusually pure, between 70 and 80%. For users, the strange name only heightened curiosity. Around 11 o'clock, they returned to their room. Alcohol and drugs were mixed. What followed took place in silence, behind a closed door. At 3:30 in the morning, Chamberlin awoke. Jonathan was lying motionless. Instead of dialing 911 immediately, Jimmy called the band's security manager. He rushed in, and together they carried Jonathan to the bathroom, ran cold water, and tried to revive him. Time slipped away. Only at 4:02 was 911 called. By 4:15, Jonathan was pronounced dead. The question came instantly. Why did it take more than 30 minutes to call for help? Some explained that in the music world of the time, the reflex was always to call the crew first. They feared the police, the scandal, and the next day's headlines. Others said Jimmy was simply in shock, unsure of what to do. A crew member later recalled, "By the time I arrived, they had tried everything, but the golden minutes were already gone." Outside the hotel, no one knew. The rest of the band was still preparing for the biggest show of their career. The set list was locked, the press was ready, and no one could imagine that only a few miles away, everything was unraveling. One detail haunts people to this day. The red rum label became infamous after Jonathan's death. Addicts across the city began hunting for the very same batch, convinced it was so strong it had killed a famous musician. A cruel paradox, and proof of how distorted that era had become. The official report was clear: death by heroin combined with alcohol. But the gap between 3:30 and 4:02 has never been explained. Jonathan's family was later told they could not understand why it took half an hour to call for help. One friend put it plainly: for a man dying, 30 minutes is a lifetime. Inside the band, shock turned to collapse. Chamberlin was arrested for drug possession. The Smashing Pumpkins fired him immediately. Billy Corgan canceled shows and faced a media storm. In the middle of it all, Jonathan was forgotten. His death overshadowed by scandal. His name reduced to a short headline: Smashing Pumpkins keyboardist dies of overdose. Those 30 dark minutes remain an open wound. Were they lost to panic, to habit, or to something no one wishes to say aloud? Chapter 5. Jonathan's funeral and the silence of the band. 3 days later, Jonathan Melvoin's funeral was held in New Hampshire. Family, close friends, a handful of loved ones gathered in a small church. But one absence was unmistakable. Not a single member of the Smashing Pumpkins was there. It shocked many. Just days earlier, Jonathan had been on stage with them. And now, at his final farewell, he stood without his bandmates. A family friend explained, they weren't invited. The family was too hurt, too angry. They believed the band had failed Jonathan. Meanwhile, the Pumpkins were in chaos. Jimmy Chamberlin had been arrested. The band had cut ties with him. Billy Corgan was canceling shows, all while fending off furious headlines. Jonathan's tragedy was caught in between. He had lost his life, yet attention shifted to Chamberlin's arrest and the future of the band. His name appeared in little more than brief reports. Keyboardist of Smashing Pumpkins dies of overdose. One painful detail remains in memory. At the service, Jonathan's photograph sat on the altar, still creased, unframed, as though even his farewell was rushed. The family chose silence as protection. They wanted no band members, no press, no spectacle. But their decision left a void that could not be filled. Was it protection, or proof of a rift too deep to mend? A member of the touring crew, speaking anonymously, later said, Everyone was in shock. No one knew how to respond. Whether we went or stayed away, either choice would have made things worse. But for the public, the lasting image was one of loneliness. Jonathan had once stood before tens of thousands, yet in the final moment, no bandmate was at his side. As the final song played, his family wept. A close friend whispered, "He deserved to be remembered for more than this." Do you feel the paradox? A musician who had shared the stage with one of the world's biggest bands, yet in death, he slipped away quietly, without even his fellow players present. Was the silence at his funeral an act of protection? Or was it the mark of wounds that never healed? Chapter 6. A Man Remembered. Through the songs of others. Jonathan left behind no solo album. He had no chart-topping single carrying his name. Yet after his death, music became the way he was remembered, through the voices of others. In 1997, Sarah McLachlan wrote Angel. She said she had read an article about a young musician who had died of heroin, and the image stayed with her. Many believe she was thinking of Jonathan. When McLachlan sang, "In the arms of the angel, may you find some comfort here," listeners could hear him in every line. The song became timeless, filling radio airwaves, and though it never mentioned him directly, it gave Jonathan's death a resonance far beyond his own life. His sisters, Wendy and Lisa, also refused to let the loss slip quietly away. On their album Girl Bras, they wrote the song Jonathan. It was not a commercial hit, but a private farewell, their way of keeping their brother alive in memory. Even Prince, who had once worked closely with the Melvoin family, recorded The Love We Make for his Emancipation album. Many have seen it as a tribute to Jonathan, a mournful meditation on surrender and the cost of what is left behind. The paradox is sharp. In life, Jonathan often stood in the background, rarely noticed. In death, he stepped into the light through songs that belonged to others. He became an unseen name inside music, more famous than his own. Some believe Jonathan became a symbol of an era. In the mid-90s, when the phrase heroin chic dominated magazines, his death served as a warning. It showed that behind the cold, glamorous images, there were real lives breaking down. Friends recalled that Jonathan often recorded short fragments on unmarked cassette tapes. A few were found among his belongings after his death. No one knows what they contained. Perhaps only stray improvisations, or maybe unfinished songs. That detail haunted many. Was Jonathan's truest voice still hidden, never heard? His legacy then lives in absence, an emptiness filled by the music, the memories, and the tributes of others. Perhaps this is the only way Jonathan is remembered, not as a complete artist, but as the echo of a tragedy, carried on in songs not his own. Conclusion: fame, loneliness, and questions without answers. Jonathan Melvoin. For many, his name was only a short headline in 1996. Smashing Pumpkins keyboardist dies of overdose. But to family and friends, he was a husband, a father, and a musician who longed for recognition. He was born into music, raised among legends, played beside Prince, and toured the world with the Pumpkins. Yet it all ended in one night, in a room at the Regency Hotel. His life was filled with paradox. He joined a band at its brightest moment, just as it began to fall apart. He found closeness with Jimmy Chamberlain, but that bond pulled him into heroin. He played before tens of thousands, but his funeral lacked his bandmates. And in the end, he left no music of his own. Yet his name lives on in songs that became immortal. His family never forgot those 30 minutes between 3:30 and 4:02. Why did it take half an hour to call for help? No one ever gave a clear answer. That silence has lingered for nearly 3 decades. In the aftermath, the public focused on Chamberlain's arrest and the future of the Smashing Pumpkins. Jonathan, already gone, was quickly pushed out of the frame. Once again, he stood outside the spotlight, and yet his legacy endured. Angel by Sarah McLachlan, Jonathan by Wendy and Lisa, The Love We Make by Prince, each became a farewell. Through them, Jonathan's name continues to echo, not by what he released, but by how others chose to remember him. His story is not only about heroin, it is about loneliness, pressure, and silence within the music industry. It reflects a generation of artists swept away, leaving their families and audiences with unanswered questions. So who was Jonathan Melvoin? A victim of heroin? A casualty of an industry? Or a soul who only wanted to be seen? Perhaps we will never have a complete answer, but one truth remains. He was gone far too soon. And the final question still lingers. Was his death just another tragedy on the long list of rock and roll losses? Or was it a reminder that behind the light, there are always souls left unseen?